I still remember the exact shade of burgundy wallpaper in my mother's kitchen when I heard her selling my life away. "She's stronger and better for you," she whispered to Mark, my boyfriend of 3 years, while I stood frozen outside the doorway, my heart collapsing in on itself like a dying star. I never imagined that overhearing those words would set me on a path that would transform me from a struggling artist to a woman who commanded boardrooms, from betrayed girlfriend to a wife and mother with everything they claimed I couldn't achieve. The irony of revenge isn't in the planning, it's in living well despite those who discarded you. And when fate finally brought us face to face again, with my hand in my millionaire husband's and my daughter asleep upstairs, I realized true power isn't in making others small, it's in how magnificently you rise. I shouldn't have gone looking for Mark that night. The graduation party was crowded, the late June heat making the room stuffy despite the open windows. My cousin's achievement had brought the entire family together, aunts discussing recipes, uncles debating politics, and my mother, ever the perfect hostess, making sure everyone's glasses stayed full. "I'll grab us drinks," Mark had said, squeezing my hand before disappearing into the crowd. I nodded, continuing my conversation with my aunt about my latest gallery rejection. When 15 minutes passed without his return, I excused myself and went searching, the hardwood floors creaking beneath my feet as I navigated through clusters of relatives. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, a sliver of fluorescent light spilling into the dimly lit hallway. I was about to push it open when I heard my mother's voice, the particular tone she reserved for her most persuasive arguments, the one I'd heard countless times growing up, usually before she convinced me to abandon something I loved for something she deemed more practical. "Audrey is sweet, but let's be honest, Mark. My Elizabeth has always been the achiever, the one with real potential." My hand froze on the door frame, my lungs suddenly unable to draw breath. "You deserve someone who will push you forward in life, not hold you back." Through the narrow opening, I could see Mark's profile, the slight furrow in his brow as he considered my mother's words. The drinks he'd promised to fetch sat forgotten on the counter between them. He didn't immediately object or laugh off her suggestion. The silence stretched, each second of his hesitation a small betrayal. "I've always thought you two had more chemistry anyway," my mother continued, patting his arm with maternal affection. The casual way she discussed dismantling my relationship made bile rise in my throat. "Elizabeth has been watching you for years. She's just waiting for her chance. My sister Elizabeth, brilliant, accomplished Elizabeth. The daughter who had fulfilled all my mother's expectations by becoming a lawyer instead of pursuing frivolous dreams as I had with my art degree. The sister who apparently had been watching my boyfriend with calculating eyes while smiling at me across Sunday dinner tables." "I don't know, Mrs. Davis," Mark finally spoke, his voice carrying the hesitation of a man not rejecting an idea outright, but considering its merits. "Audrey and I have been together for a long time. And what do you have to show for it?" My mother's voice sharpened, the velvet glove slipping to reveal the steel fist beneath. "Elizabeth just made junior partner at her law firm. What's Audrey doing with that art degree of hers? Making coffee and sketching portraits nobody buys." Each word struck like a physical blow. The dismissal of my struggles, the reduction of my passion to a frivolous pursuit not worth respecting. But it was Mark's thoughtful nod that truly crushed me, the small, almost imperceptible movement of acknowledgement that suggested her assessment had merit. I backed away silently, my hand pressed against my mouth to contain the sound threatening to escape. Somehow I made it through the remainder of the evening, laughing at appropriate moments, kissing Mark goodbye at the end of the night, all while feeling as though I was watching myself from a distance, a perfect performance while everything inside me crumbled. The changes were subtle at first, Mark mentioning Elizabeth more frequently in conversation, casual comments about her recent courtroom victory or how her new workout regimen was really showing results. Then came the cancellations, dinner plans abandoned for sudden work emergencies, movie nights postponed because he was too exhausted. The sudden interest in legal documentaries that Elizabeth recommended appeared, along with texts between them discussing lunch plans he never mentioned to me. When confronted, Mark's dismissal was so reasonable it made me question my own sanity. "She's your sister, Audrey," he explained with practiced patience. "It would be weird if we didn't get along. We bumped into each other downtown. Why are you making this into something it isn't?" I began to dread family gatherings, watching their interactions with wounded eyes, the private smiles across the table, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought no one was watching. My stomach twisted into knots each time, but I said nothing, fear of confirmation paralyzing me. My best friend Jamie noticed before I would admit it to myself. After a particularly tense dinner where Mark left early claiming work stress, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Something's different with him," she observed, her eyes full of concern. "He doesn't look at you the same way anymore, Aud. "We're just going through a rough patch," I insisted, the lie bitter on my tongue as I aggressively dried dishes. "Everyone does." "Not like this," Jamie whispered, but didn't push further when she saw the tears threatening to spill. The Majestic Theater had just announced a limited engagement of Mark's favorite band. 3 months had passed since that kitchen conversation, and things between us had grown increasingly strained. I'd become a ghost in my own relationship, constantly analyzing every interaction, every casual dismissal. The concert tickets felt like a peace offering, a way to recapture what we'd lost or what I was desperately pretending we hadn't. I still had the key to his apartment. We'd talked about moving in together before everything changed, had even started browsing listings. The door opened silently, the familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne hanging in the air. I noticed his jacket thrown carelessly over the back of the couch, his laptop open on the coffee table, normal signs of his habitation. Then my eyes caught the trail of clothing leading toward the bedroom, a silk blouse that wasn't mine crumpled on the hallway floor, followed by a delicate shoe I recognized immediately as Elizabeth's designer purchase she'd bragged about at our last family dinner. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed, and the sounds emanating from within confirmed what I already knew before my trembling hand pushed it open. Elizabeth's long dark hair, the hair my mother had always praised while suggesting I do something more sophisticated with my own, spilled across Mark's chest as they lay tangled in his sheets, completely unaware of my presence until the concert tickets slipped from my fingers, scattering across the hardwood floor like confetti for a celebration I wasn't invited to. "Audrey!" Mark scrambled upright, pulling the sheet to cover himself while Elizabeth simply stared, more annoyed than ashamed at the interruption. Her lack of embarrassment struck me as deeply as the betrayal itself. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a drunken mistake. This was calculated. Intentional. "This isn't," he started, panic flooding his features. "Don't," my voice sounded foreign to my own ears, oddly calm despite the earthquake devastating my insides. "Don't say it isn't what it looks like. I'm not an idiot." Elizabeth sat up slowly, making no attempt to cover herself. The confidence in her posture spoke volumes. She had already won, had known she would win from the moment my mother planted the seed in Mark's mind. "You were going to find out eventually," she said with a shrug. "Maybe this is for the best." Their calm acceptance was more devastating than any hysterical apology could have been. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, this was the culmination of a deliberate plan, one they had executed with precision while I clung to the delusion that I could fix what was already irreparably broken. How long? I asked, though the answer hardly mattered. The betrayal was complete whether it had been days or months. 2 months officially, Mark admitted, unable to meet my eyes. The officially hung in the air between us an acknowledgement that emotionally, he had strayed much earlier. But we've been talking for longer. Since Mom had her little chat with you, I finished for him, the pieces finally clicking into perfect, horrible clarity. Their surprised expressions confirmed I'd known more than they realized. I left without screaming or throwing things, though later I would wish I had given them some display of emotion to remember me by. The rage would come later that night in the safety of my apartment, where I would shatter every gift he'd ever given me while sobbing until my throat was raw. In that moment, I simply felt hollow, scrubbed raw from the inside out, incapable of giving them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The confrontation with my mother the next day was almost worse than discovering Mark and Elizabeth together. We stood in her immaculate kitchen, the same room where she'd planted the seeds of my relationship's destruction. She arranged white lilies in a crystal vase, her movements precise and practiced, as I laid out what I had discovered. "Don't be so dramatic, Audrey," she said with a sigh, not even pausing in her task. "Relationships end all the time. Elizabeth and Mark make more sense together. You must see that." The casual cruelty of her dismissal left me breathless. "Why would you do this to me?" My voice cracked, the question of a wounded child rather than an adult woman. "Your own daughter." She sighed, finally looking up from her flowers, her expression one of practiced patience worn thin. "Because Elizabeth has always worked harder, aimed higher. She deserves a partner who matches her ambition." She touched my cheek with cool fingers that felt like a stranger's. "You were always the soft one, the dreamer. You'll find someone better suited to your temperament." In that moment, I understood my mother had never seen me clearly, had never valued what made me who I was. In her eyes, I would always be the lesser daughter, the disappointment who chose art over law, passion over pragmatism, emotion over calculation. "You're wrong about me," I whispered, stepping away from her touch. "You always have been." I spent that night packing everything I could fit into my car. Jamie helped me, offering her couch until I figured out my next move, but I had already decided, I needed more than a new apartment. I needed a new city, a fresh start where every street corner didn't hold memories of Mark or reminders of my sister's betrayal. "Are you sure about this?" Jamie asked as I loaded the last box into my trunk, her eyes filled with worry. "Running away won't fix anything." "I'm not running away," I corrected her, feeling a strange calm settle over me as I closed the trunk. "I'm moving forward." The next morning, I left a short note for my mother, sister, and Mark. It didn't contain forgiveness or accusations, just 3 words: "Watch me thrive." With my art portfolio, savings that would last 2 months if I was careful, and a determination born from heartbreak, I pointed my car west toward Vancouver, a city where nobody knew my name or the story of how easily I'd been replaced. Vancouver welcomed me with a torrential downpour that matched my internal landscape. Fat raindrops pelted my windshield as I navigated unfamiliar streets, the wipers struggling to maintain visibility. There was something cathartic about the weather, as if the city understood I needed to be cleansed, needed the world to acknowledge the storm inside me. The vacancy sign of the Pacific Inn glowed red through the rain, a beacon of temporary refuge. The motel sat on the city's eastern edge, the only accommodation my dwindling funds could sustain while I searched for something permanent. The night clerk barely looked up from his dog-eared paperback as he slid a key across the counter, the number 17 dangling from a plastic fob. Room 17 smelled faintly of cigarettes despite the no smoking sign prominently displayed, the scent partially masked by cheap air freshener. I set my suitcase down and surveyed my new domain, a queen bed with a faded floral comforter, a TV likely older than I was, a small table with a single chair pushed against the wall beneath a window that overlooked the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by my hastily packed belongings, the fragments of a life I was leaving behind. Setting the timer on my phone, I allowed myself 5 minutes to cry, just 5 minutes of weakness before the real work began. The tears came immediately, hot and relentless, my body shaking with silent sobs that released 3 years of love and trust into the indifferent air of a strange room. When the alarm chimed, I wiped my face with resolute finality, opened my laptop, and began hunting for apartments and jobs with equal desperation. 3 days and 12 apartment viewings later, I signed a lease for a studio in Kitsilano, a neighborhood with character, my realtor had said optimistically. What she meant was that the building was old, the elevator frequently out of service, and my neighbors a colorful assortment of students, immigrants, and night shift workers. The rent consumed nearly 2/3 of my savings, starting the invisible countdown clock on my Vancouver experiment. The studio was barely 400 square feet, but it had large windows that flooded the space with light on the rare sunny days and a small balcony where I could watch the rain. I hung my few pieces of art, arranged my second-hand furniture, and tried to make it feel like home. At night, I'd sit on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching strangers hurry by below, each with their own invisible burdens, their own secret heartbreaks. There was comfort in that collective anonymity. "You have 30 days, I told my reflection as I pinned job listings to my refrigerator with magnets shaped like tiny maple leaves, my first and only Vancouver souvenir purchase. Find work or admit defeat. The job search was a soul-crushing exercise in humility. My BFA and 3 years of barista experience qualified me for precisely nothing that would cover Vancouver's cost of living. I applied for gallery assistant positions, administrative roles, retail management, anything that might provide a foothold. Each rejection email chipped away at my already fragile confidence, each we've decided to pursue other candidates reinforcing the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother's, "You were never going to make it on your own." 28 days later, after a string of rejections and unanswered applications, I walked into Meridian Investment Group for my final scheduled interview. I had no interest in finance, but the administrative position required attention to detail and creative problem-solving skills I could truthfully claim from my art background. The sleek downtown building gleamed with wealth and purpose, making me acutely conscious of my carefully pressed department store dress and scuffed shoes that I'd attempted to refurbish with black polish. The receptionist directed me to a seating area where another candidate sat reviewing notes, her designer suit making my outfit feel suddenly childish in comparison. I clutched my portfolio containing resume copies and administrative samples I'd created for the application and tried to project confidence I didn't feel. "Miss Davis." A woman with a sleek bob and frameless glasses appeared, tablet in hand. "I'm Carol from HR. I'm afraid there's been a change." My heart sank as she continued, anticipating yet another rejection. "The administrative position has been filled internally, but Mr. Reynolds wondered if you'd be interested in interviewing for a different role, executive assistant to one of our senior partners." Hope and anxiety battled for dominance as I followed her through a maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices, finally arriving at a corner workspace where a man sat surrounded by stacks of reports and takeout containers. He looked up, revealing tired eyes and a day-old stubble that somehow enhanced rather than detracted from his professional appearance. "Patrick Reynolds," he introduced himself, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct in a way that made me feel actually seen for the first time since arriving in Vancouver. "Sorry about the mess. Quarterly reports are due, and my last assistant quit without notice." "Audrey Davis," I replied, returning his handshake with equal pressure, a small act of assertion I hadn't realized I needed. "I'm flexible about job descriptions as long as they come with a paycheck." A smile flickered across his face, transforming his exhaustion into something warmer. "Honest. I appreciate that." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Tell me why an art major from Toronto wants to work at a Vancouver investment firm." I could have crafted a diplomatic answer about career changes and financial security, the kind of response my pre-Vancouver self would have given to please an interviewer. Instead, I heard myself say, "Because starting over sometimes requires burning the map of your old life and drawing a new one." For a moment, I thought I'd blown it with my melodramatic response. Then Patrick nodded slowly, something like recognition passing across his features. "I know something about fresh starts myself." He pushed aside a stack of folders. "The job pays less than the administrative role you applied for but has more potential for advancement. The hours are brutal, the learning curve steep, and I'm told I can be demanding." "I'm not afraid of hard work or demanding people," I assured him, thinking of my mother's perpetual disapproval. "And I'm a quick learner." He hired me on the spot, and I started the next morning, having no idea that this desperate job application would eventually transform both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. The first weeks tested every limit I had. Patrick worked 16-hour days preparing client portfolios and investment strategies, expecting me to keep pace. I brought him coffee that went cold while he analyzed market trends, ordered lunches he forgot to eat, and organized chaos into manageable systems while absorbing investment terminology through osmosis. His office became my entire world, the rest of Vancouver fading into a blur of commutes in the blue-gray dawn and returns long after sunset. I learned to navigate Patrick's moods, to anticipate his needs, to translate his cryptic notations into coherent presentations. I color-coded his calendar, prioritized his emails, and slowly, methodically, brought order to his professional life. "Why are you still here?" he asked one night at 11 p.m., looking up from his computer to find me reorganizing his client files by risk profile rather than alphabetically. The office was empty except for us, the cleaning staff having come and gone hours ago. The lights of downtown Vancouver twinkled beyond the windows, a galaxy of strangers living their lives while we remain tethered to spreadsheets and projections. "Because the work isn't finished," I answered simply, continuing my task without looking up. What I didn't say was that my empty apartment held no appeal, that this office, despite the pressure and demands, was the only place in Vancouver where I felt useful, where I had purpose. Our early interactions were strictly professional but underscored by awkward moments that gradually eroded the employer-employee formality. Like when he accidentally sent me a text meant for his brother complaining about a particularly disastrous blind date. She spent the entire dinner talking about her ex-husband's podiatry practice. "Please stop setting me up with divorced friends of Jenna's." Or when I spilled coffee across important documents before a client meeting and nearly cried from stress and embarrassment. "It's just paper," he said, helping me blot the mess while I apologized profusely. His hands were steady, his voice calm in contrast to my panic. The data is backed up. Breathe, Audrey. The way he said my name, not Miss Davis or the simple Davis he often used in professional contexts, somehow anchored me, made the disaster seem manageable. It was the first time I realized he saw me as a person, not just a functional extension of his work. Lunch breaks became our unintentional bonding time. Patrick insisted I leave the office, dragging me to food trucks or hole-in-the-wall restaurants where we discussed everything except work, from his passion for classic motorcycles to my abandoned art. I kept my past vague, offering general statements about family differences and needing a change of scenery, but he never pressed for details I wasn't ready to share. "You're a mystery, Davis," he commented once over Vietnamese sandwiches, his tie loosened, a rare moment of relaxation softening his features. "Most people love talking about themselves. Most people have stories worth sharing," I deflected, focusing intently on arranging the fallen cilantro back into my sandwich. "And you don't," he challenged, not unkindly. I met his eyes then, finding no judgment in them, only genuine curiosity. "Not ones I'm ready to tell." He nodded, accepting this boundary without question, and changed the subject to a documentary about deep-sea exploration he'd watched over the weekend. The respect for my privacy, the absence of entitlement to my personal history, was refreshing after a lifetime of my mother's interrogations and Elizabeth's competitive comparisons. As months passed, our professional rhythm improved while our personal rapport deepened. Patrick began seeking my input on client presentations. I started anticipating his needs before he voiced them. Late nights evolved from stressed silence to companionable collaboration, occasionally punctuated by surprisingly personal conversations. My father wanted me to take over his construction business, Patrick confided during a particularly late evening, both of us subsisting on vending machine snacks and determination as we prepared for a major presentation. "He considers finance playing with other people's money. We haven't spoken in 2 years." The admission surprised me, not just the content, but that he would share something so personal. It was an offering, a small piece of vulnerability extended without expectation. "My mother always preferred my sister," I offered in return, the words emerging before I could reconsider. It was my first mention of family, a tiny window into the pain I carried. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. He didn't offer platitudes or judgments, just understanding silence that felt more healing than any words could have been. We returned to our work afterward, but something had shifted, a trust established, a mutual recognition of wounds carried. 6 months into my Vancouver reinvention, Patrick asked me to join him for dinner at an actual restaurant instead of eating takeout at our desks. I assumed it was to celebrate landing a major client who had chosen our proposal over 3 larger firms. Instead, over dessert, he pushed a business plan across the table. "I've been developing this for 3 years, he explained as I schemed the document. A boutique investment firm focused on sustainable businesses and first-generation entrepreneurs, clients who are overlooked by traditional firms." The plan was meticulous, the vision clear and compelling. Figures and projections were interspersed with philosophy and purpose, not just how to make money, but why, and for whom. I looked up, confused. "It's impressive, but why show me?" "Because I'm leaving Meridian next month to launch it," he leaned forward, eyes intense in a way I'd never seen before, "and I want you to come with me, not as my assistant, but as operations manager. You understand systems, people, and how to make things work in ways I never could." The offer caught me completely off guard. 6 months ago, I'd been a heartbroken artist fleeing Toronto with no plan beyond escape. Now, someone was not just recognizing my capabilities but betting on them. That's insane, I managed, pulse quickening. I barely understand the investment world. You understand more than you think, he countered. And you have something more valuable: integrity and intuition. The technical stuff can be learned. It would be risky, I said cautiously, though something inside me had already begun to say yes. Extremely, he agreed with unexpected candor. We might fail spectacularly. But I'd rather fail building something meaningful than succeed making wealthy people marginally wealthier. I studied his face, searching for signs of impulsiveness or hollow ambition I'd seen in others. Instead, I found steady determination and genuine belief in his vision and, surprisingly, in me. When do we start? I heard myself ask, feeling for the first time since leaving Toronto that I was moving towards something, not just away. Our transition from colleagues to business partners happened seamlessly, but the shift from friends to something more took us both by surprise. It began with late nights reviewing business plans that evolved into conversations about hopes and dreams, then dinners that lasted well past discussing work. The professional boundaries we'd carefully maintained at Meridian began to blur as we built something that was wholly ours. Reynolds Capital Partners operated initially from a small office with industrial carpeting and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. What it lacked in aesthetics, it made up for in potential blank walls waiting for an identity, empty rooms ready for purpose. I threw myself into creating systems, establishing procedures, designing marketing materials that communicated our values. Patrick focused on client acquisition, leveraging his reputation to secure meetings with businesses too small for Meridian but perfect for our boutique approach. One night, 6 months into our venture, we'd stayed late finalizing a presentation for a potential investor. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes outside our windows, Vancouver transformed into a postcard version of itself. We stood together at the window, watching the empty street below disappear beneath a pristine white blanket. "It's beautiful," I said softly, the hushed quality of snowfall making me lower my voice instinctively. "You're beautiful," Patrick replied, his eyes on me rather than the view. Before I could process his words, he leaned in and kissed me. It was tentative at first, a question more than a declaration. When I responded, the kiss deepened, becoming something neither of us had planned but both had perhaps been moving toward for months. Neither of us said anything about it the next day, both afraid to complicate our precarious business relationship. But when it happened again a week later, this time in his car after a successful client meeting, both of us giddy with the validation of our business model, we could no longer pretend it was an impulse or a momentary lapse in judgment. "This could ruin everything we built," I warned him one evening as we sat in my apartment, takeout containers pushed aside, the conversation we'd been avoiding finally broached. "If it ends badly. Or it could be the foundation for something even better," he countered, always the optimist to my cautious realist. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I'm not suggesting we rush into anything, Audrey. But I don't want to pretend I don't feel what I feel, either." Our courtship was unconventional: business meetings that turned into dates, market research trips that became weekend getaways. We kept it private from clients and investors, determined to be taken seriously in a field where women were often viewed as accessories rather than equals. But in private, we explored this unexpected connection, discovering layers to each other beyond our professional personas. I learned that Patrick sang off-key to classic rock when he thought no one could hear, that he volunteered at a youth center teaching financial literacy, that he called his mother every Sunday without fail. He discovered my sketchbooks full of charcoal drawings I'd started doing again, my collection of first edition novels found in used bookstores, my habit of stress baking at 2 a.m. when a problem seemed insurmountable. Within a year, Patrick proposed during a mundane moment, both of us in sweatpants reviewing quarterly projections on my living room floor, surrounded by spreadsheets and empty tea mugs. We'd been arguing over a particular investment strategy, the kind of productive disagreement that had become our hallmark. "Marry me," he said suddenly, looking up from a spreadsheet mid-sentence. No preamble, no dropping to one knee, just those two words offered with absolute certainty. I stared at him, convinced I'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, setting aside his laptop. "Be my partner in everything." No ring, no rehearsed speech, just genuine certainty that caught me off guard. "That's not how proposals work," I laughed, though my heart raced. "There's supposed to be dinner, maybe candles, definitely not expense reports. Since when do we do anything the conventional way?" He smiled, taking my hands in his. "And I don't need staged romance to know that you're the person I want beside me for the rest of my life. We can do the fancy dinner if you want, but I couldn't wait another minute to ask." "People will say it's too soon," I hesitated, though my heart had already answered. "We've only been together a year. Let them talk." He squeezed my hands. "I've never been more sure of anything." We married 3 months later at a small ceremony in Stanley Park, with cherry blossoms providing a natural canopy. I wore a simple cream dress I'd found in a vintage shop, Patrick a charcoal suit that made his eyes appear more gray than blue. Jamie flew in from Toronto to stand beside me, Patrick's brother Michael served as his best man. No elaborate vows, just straightforward promises spoken with unmistakable conviction. "I choose you as my partner in all things," Patrick said, holding my hands tightly. "I promise that our partnership will always come first, before work, before success, before everything." The words healed something in me that had been broken by betrayal. This wasn't a man looking for someone stronger or better, he saw me exactly as I was and chose me deliberately. Our reception was dinner at our favorite Vietnamese restaurant, the one where we'd shared so many lunches. The owner, Mrs. Nguyen, insisted on decorating our table with flowers and serving champagne she'd hidden for special occasions. "To partnerships that lift us higher," Patrick toasted, his eyes never leaving mine as our small gathering raised their glasses. Reality quickly replaced romance as we faced the challenges of a start-up business. Our fledgling company operated out of our one-bedroom apartment to save on overhead costs. The dining table became our conference room, the living room transformed into a makeshift office with filing cabinets disguised as end tables. We scheduled client meetings at cafes or hotel lobbies, carefully crafting the illusion of established success we hadn't yet achieved. I took a part-time position at an art gallery to supplement our income while Patrick pursued potential clients. Our savings dwindled as months passed without the breakthrough we needed. Some nights, I'd find Patrick still awake at 3 a.m., recalculating projections or revising proposals, the weight of our combined futures evident in the tension of his shoulders. "We should consider taking on more traditional clients," I suggested delicately after our 6th month of barely covering expenses. "Just until we're established. If we compromise now, we'll never get back to our original vision," he argued, the stubborn determination in his voice both admirable and frightening. Our first real argument as a married couple erupted over finances. Patrick wanted to invest our emergency fund into expanding the business. I insisted we needed security. The fight ended with slammed doors and her feelings, but also a compromise, half for growth, half for security. It became our pattern, his ambition balanced by my pragmatism, creating equilibrium neither of us could achieve alone. 8 months into our marriage, opportunity knocked twice in very different forms. A small sustainable energy company needed investors who understood their mission beyond profit margins. Patrick spent weeks developing a presentation that explained not just returns on investment but environmental impact and community benefits. I designed informational packets that showcased both professionalism and personality, staying up until dawn perfecting graphics that would communicate complex data in accessible ways. The morning of the presentation, I rushed to the bathroom for the third time, my stomach heaving. Patrick held my hair back, concern etched in his features. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he suggested, handing me a cool washcloth. "This bug has lasted too long." "It's just stress," I insisted, though a small voice in the back of my mind whispered another possibility, one I wasn't ready to acknowledge with so much hanging in the balance. "I need to finish the presentation handouts before the meeting." The client chose us over established firms, bringing 3 other eco-conscious businesses with them. Finally, we had momentum, the validation we'd been desperately seeking. Patrick popped champagne in our tiny office, his face alight with vindication and relief. I raised my glass in celebration but couldn't bring myself to drink it, another sign I deliberately ignored. 2 days later, I sat on the edge of our bathtub, staring at the plastic stick in my hand, the 2 pink lines leaving no room for interpretation. Pregnant. The word exploded in my mind with equal parts wonder and terror. We were just finding our footing professionally, living in a 1-bedroom apartment crowded with file boxes, subsisting on takeout and hope. A baby seemed impossible, irresponsible even. Yet beneath the panic, a small flame of joy flickered. A child, something completely ours, untainted by past betrayals, a future neither of us had planned but suddenly seemed inevitable. I sat there for nearly an hour, trying to imagine Patrick's reaction, rehearsing how to tell him news that would irrevocably change our carefully constructed plans. When I heard his key in the lock, I stood on shaky legs and moved to the living room, the test hidden in my pocket. He entered with an armload of groceries, chattering excitedly about a potential new client who had called that afternoon. And they specifically mentioned our presentation to SolarStream, said they were impressed with our holistic approach, he was saying as he set the bags on the counter. Then he caught sight of my face and stopped mid-sentence. "Audrey? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said carefully. "Something's different." His brow furrowed. "Different how?" I took a deep breath and pulled the test from my pocket, holding it out wordlessly. Patrick stared at it for a long moment, his expression transitioning from confusion to understanding to something I couldn't quite read. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. I nodded, tears suddenly threatening. "I took 2 tests." He set down the bag of groceries he was still holding and crossed the room to me in 3 quick strides. His hands came up to frame my face, his eyes searching mine. "What are you thinking right now? Tell me everything." "I'm thinking that our timing is terrible," I admitted, the words tumbling out. "That we're just getting the business off the ground, that we don't have room, that we can barely feed ourselves some months, that we're going to be parents," he finished, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "We're going to have a baby." The wonder in his voice dissolved my anxiety. "You're not upset?" Upset. He looked genuinely baffled by the question. Audrey, this is unexpected, yes. Challenging, definitely. But upset? Never. He pulled me into an embrace, his heartbeat steady against my ear. There's never perfect timing for life's biggest moments. We'll make it work together. The business will adapt, just like we will, he assured me. We've never done anything the conventional way. Why start now? That night, he surprised me by recreating our first date takeout containers from that same Vietnamese restaurant, spreadsheets pushed aside to make room for spring rolls and noodles on our dining table. To our first major deal, he toasted with grocery store wine in his coffee mug while I sipped ginger ale in mine, and to my brilliant wife who never stopped believing, even when I almost did. And to our growing family, the most important investment we'll ever make. The business grew steadily after that first breakthrough. Our apartment became increasingly cramped with file boxes, office equipment, and now, baby preparation items. Client calls were occasionally interrupted by the sound of me being sick in the bathroom, investor meetings were scheduled around prenatal appointments. The arrangement became unsustainable the day a potential investor arrived early for a meeting while I was experiencing particularly violent morning sickness in the bathroom. Patrick had to stall in the hallway, making awkward small talk until I emerged, pale but composed. We need real office space, Patrick conceded that evening, watching me struggle to find room for baby clothes someone had gifted us. And possibly a home where client files and receiving blankets don't share the same drawers. With cautious optimism, we signed a lease on a small office space downtown and moved to a slightly larger apartment, one with a spare bedroom that would serve as both a nursery and a home office until we could afford something more permanent. The separation between work and home brought welcome balance to our relationship as we prepared for parenthood. I worked remotely during my third trimester, developing systems that would allow our growing company to function during my maternity leave. Patrick took on additional clients, working longer hours while somehow managing to attend every doctor's appointment, his hand warm and steady in mine as we listened to our child's heartbeat. Our daughter, Maya, was born on the same day we signed our 10th client, a synchronicity that seemed to bless both our ventures with cosmic approval. I held our newborn daughter in the hospital bed while Patrick finalized the contract on his laptop beside me, both of us exhausted but exhilarated by the parallel beginnings we were witnessing. She has your eyes, I whispered, tracing a finger along our daughter's impossibly small cheek. And your stubborn chin, Patrick replied, setting aside his work to perch on the edge of the bed, one arm around my shoulders, the other hand gently cradling Maya's head. She's perfect. Looking down at our daughter's sleeping face, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me, a determination that she would never know the kind of conditional love I had grown up with, would never be measured against impossible standards or found wanting. She would be valued precisely for who she was, not who someone else wanted her to be. I never thought I could love someone I just met this much, Patrick admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I did, I replied softly, leaning against him. I felt the same way the day I met you. 3 years of relentless work followed Maya's birth. Patrick developed a reputation for integrity and innovation in sustainable investment. Our client list expanded beyond Vancouver to global markets. I built systems and teams that turned Patrick's vision into operational reality, eventually returning full-time as co when Maya started preschool. The girl we'd named after Maya Angelou grew into a spirited toddler with Patrick's analytical mind and my artistic tendencies, a perfect blend of her parents who spent mornings in the office child care center we'd established and afternoons helping in our home office, her small desk covered in crayons and coloring books positioned beside my workspace. We complemented each other perfectly. Patrick's charisma and strategic thinking matched with my attention to detail and organizational skills. What had begun as a desperate gamble had evolved into a respected boutique firm known for its ethical standards and innovative approach. Our biggest milestone came unexpectedly. A major investment group approached Patrick about acquiring Reynolds Capital Partners. The number they offered made my knees weak. Enough money to secure Maya's future, to buy the house we'd been dreaming of, to never worry about finances again. But the offer included a condition: Patrick would need to stay on as CEO of the newly expanded Sustainable Investment Division with complete decision-making authority. We discussed the proposal late into the night after Maya had gone to bed, weighing the benefits against the inevitable changes it would bring to our carefully constructed life balance. "I never imagined running something this size," Patrick admitted, pacing our living room, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. "When I left Meridian, I wanted freedom, autonomy. This would be everything you ever wanted but were afraid to admit," I finished for him, understanding his ambition better than he sometimes did himself. The resources to make real change in the industry, to set the standards rather than just follow them. He stopped pacing and looked at me. "What do you think?" "Truly. I think they recognize what I've always known, that you're exceptional at what you do, and that our model works." I stood and straightened his tie, a gesture that had become symbolic of our partnership. "They didn't just offer to buy the company, Patrick. They offered to buy your vision, your integrity." The contracts were signed the following week. Overnight, we went from successful entrepreneurs to wealthy beyond our expectations. The transition wasn't easy. Patrick worked longer hours establishing the new division while I adjusted to my role as Chief Operations Officer, but watching him command boardrooms with the same passion he'd once displayed in our tiny apartment filled me with pride that eclipsed the sacrifices. "We did it," he whispered during the champagne toast at the official announcement of his appointment as CEO. "Together," I replied, squeezing his hand beneath the table, our private signal that had endured from our earliest days. As I watched him shake hands with executives who now reported to him, I thought about how far we'd come from that rain-soaked day I'd arrived in Vancouver, heartbroken and alone. Life had taken everything from me, only to replace it with something I never could have imagined. 5 years into Patrick's role as CEO, I had firmly established myself as more than just the boss's wife. My operational systems had become the backbone of the company's expansion into global markets, and executives regularly sought my input on organizational decisions. We had found our rhythm: Patrick the visionary, me the architect who built the structures to support his dreams. Our personal life had settled into comfortable routines as well: Sunday mornings spent reading the paper over coffee, monthly dinner parties with our small circle of friends, and watching Maya grow into a confident 8-year-old who already showed signs of inheriting both her father's ambition and my creativity. Our new home in West Vancouver offered sweeping views of the ocean and mountains, a far cry from the cramped apartment where we'd started our business and our marriage. The sprawling garden provided space for Maya's adventures and quiet corners for my renewed artistic pursuits. Success had allowed me to reclaim parts of myself I'd set aside during our building years, my home studio filled with canvases exploring themes of resilience and transformation. I rarely thought about Toronto anymore. Jamie visited occasionally, bringing carefully filtered updates about mutual friends but never mentioning my family. I'd made peace with that chapter of my life being firmly closed, or so I believed, until a particular Tuesday morning. "You might want to see this," Patrick said, sliding a financial magazine across the breakfast table. The small headline in the corner read, Davis and Associates faces bankruptcy after failed expansion. My sister's law firm, the one she'd built with Mark after he left his previous position to join her practice, was collapsing under debt and mismanagement. The article detailed Elizabeth's failed attempt to expand nationally, resulting in mounting debt and client exodus. Mark had apparently joined another firm's compliance team after their joint venture collapsed, taking a significant pay cut. The irony wasn't lost on me. The stronger match my mother had engineered now struggling while I sat in my beautiful kitchen beside a successful husband, with our daughter chattering about her science project at the table. "I didn't know you still followed news from Toronto," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart raced with conflicting emotions. "I don't, but Meridian Investment Group is on our acquisition shortlist," Patrick explained carefully. "Your ex works there now in their legal department. I wanted you to hear it from me before the office started buzzing about it." Meridian, the very firm where Patrick and I had met, where our story had begun. Now potentially becoming part of our corporate family, with Mark somewhere in its organizational structure. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "Does it change your acquisition plans?" I asked pragmatically, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "That depends on you," Patrick replied without hesitation. "Meridian's sustainable energy portfolio aligns perfectly with our growth strategy, but I'll walk away if it makes you uncomfortable." His willingness to sacrifice a smart business move for my emotional comfort exemplified why I'd fallen in love with him. In that moment, I realized that the wounds that had driven me across the country had finally healed, not because time had passed, but because I'd built a life that made the past irrelevant. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, squeezing his hand. "It's just business." 2 weeks later, the acquisition was finalized. Meridian would maintain its brand identity while operating under our corporate umbrella, with Mark remaining in his compliance role, technically now our employee, though several management layers would separate us. "We should host a gala," Patrick suggested one evening as we reviewed the quarterly results. "Celebrate the acquisition, showcase our expanded sustainable portfolio to investors, and introduce the Meridian team to our corporate culture." I nodded absently, making notes about potential venues, before his next words brought my pen to a halt. "Including the Toronto contingent," he added carefully. "If you're comfortable with it." The suggestion wasn't unusual. We hosted similar events annually, typically at Vancouver's Museum of Anthropology, where the sustainability theme resonated with our company values. What caught me off guard was the implication: a formal, professional reunion with people who had once defined my understanding of betrayal. "You want to invite Mark and his colleagues to our corporate gala?" I clarified, keeping my voice neutral. "Not just Mark," Patrick said, setting down his papers. "I think we should invite all key players from Toronto, including affiliated legal representatives who've worked with Meridian. Show them our corporate values extend beyond Vancouver." The realization dawned slowly. "You want to invite my sister and my mother? Is that what this is about?" Patrick's genuine surprise made me realize I'd never shared my full family history with him, only vague references to a difficult mother and a favored sister. Patrick knew I'd left Toronto after a betrayal but didn't know the specifics. I'd compartmentalized so effectively that I'd forgotten he couldn't see the connections I found glaringly obvious. The documents lay spread across our bed that night: acquisition papers, legal correspondence, the list of key stakeholders. Patrick sat beside me, his expression growing increasingly somber as I pointed out the names that had once been the center of my world. "Mark Davis, Compliance Officer, Meridian Investment Group," I said, tapping the first name. My ex-boyfriend of 3 years. The man who left me for my sister after my mother convinced him she was stronger and better for him. Patrick's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing me to continue. Elizabeth Davis, legal counsel, Davis and Associates, I continued, the absurdity of the doubled surname not lost on me. My sister, who apparently married Mark after their affair, destroyed my life. The stronger, better option according to my mother. And Victoria Davis? Patrick asked quietly, pointing to another name on the legal documents. My mother, I confirmed. Senior partner at Davis and Associates. The architect of the whole betrayal. I told him everything, then the conversation I'd overheard at my cousin's graduation party, the months of suspicion, the devastating discovery in Mark's bedroom, my mother's unapologetic response. Words I'd kept carefully contained for 8 years poured out in a torrent of still raw emotion. All this time, Patrick said when I finally fell silent, I knew something had hurt you deeply, but I never imagined. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly processing. Why didn't you tell me? At first because it hurt too much, I admitted. Then because it seemed irrelevant to our life here. Eventually because I'd put it so far behind me that bringing it up felt like giving it power it didn't deserve anymore. He nodded slowly, understanding. And now they're potentially coming into our orbit again. Ironic, isn't it? I gave a humorless laugh. They're struggling while I gestured around our bedroom, the comfortable luxury we built together. Is that why you agreed to the Meridian acquisition so readily? Patrick asked, no judgment in his voice, just genuine curiosity. For some kind of revenge. The question made me pause, forcing me to examine my own motivations. Had some part of me seen this as an opportunity for retribution? The thought was uncomfortable but demanded honesty. No, I said finally, certain of my answer. I agreed because it makes good business sense. The personal connection didn't even register until you mentioned the gala. Patrick studied my face, then nodded, satisfied with my sincerity. So what do you want to do? We can structure the gala without the Toronto contingent. Or I can send a representative in my place if you prefer not to attend. Maybe it's time, I said slowly, surprising myself with the thought. Maybe I need to see them again, not as the heartbroken girl who fled Toronto, but as the woman I've become. Foreclosure. Patrick suggested. Not just that, I realized, the idea taking shape as I spoke. For recognition. Not to hurt them as they hurt me, but to stand confidently before them as the woman I've become despite their dismissal of my worth. Patrick reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But for what it's worth, I think you're exactly right. Let them see who Audrey Reynolds has become. The next weeks were a blur of gala preparations alongside a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. I channeled my nervous energy into ensuring every detail was perfect, from the sustainable seafood menu to the carbon-neutral transportation for guests. Our event coordinator commented that I'd never been so involved in planning before, her raised eyebrow conveying curiosity about my sudden micromanagement. I smiled and explained that the Meridian acquisition was particularly significant for our growth strategy, requiring special attention. As I reviewed the finalized guest list, seeing their names in black and white brought a wave of emotions I thought I'd processed years ago. What would they think, seeing me now? Would my mother still view me as the lesser daughter? Would Mark regret his choice? The questions circled like vultures despite my attempts to dismiss them. Having second thoughts. Patrick asked, finding me staring at the invitation mock-ups late one night, my finger tracing over the embossed letterhead that bore our company logo. Not about inviting them, I clarified, looking up at him. Just wondering if I'm doing this for the right reasons. Am I still seeking their approval after all these years? Patrick sat beside me, taking my hands in his. Only you can answer that. But from where I stand, you stopped needing anyone's approval the day you drove into Vancouver with nothing but determination and talent. He kissed my forehead, his presence steadying as always. Whatever your reasons, I'll be right beside you. The RSVPs arrived gradually: business associates, investors, Meridian employees. Then came the responses from Toronto. Mark would attend as Meridian's compliance officer, Elizabeth would accompany him as his wife, and most surprisingly, my mother accepted with a brief note indicating she was looking forward to reconnecting after all these years. The formal invitations had been mailed 3 weeks before the event, elegant cards featuring recycled paper and soy-based ink that reflected our company's values. For my family's invitations, I had included a personal note, looking forward to showing you the life I built. Audrey Reynolds. No mention of the past, no hint of recrimination or triumph, just a simple statement of fact. This was my life now, built with my own hands and heart, and I was no longer afraid to have them see it. As the gala approached, my wardrobe became an unexpected source of anxiety. The perfect dress became symbolic; it needed to project confidence without obvious attempt to impress. After countless shopping trips, I found it, a sophisticated emerald gown that complemented my eyes and projected elegant authority. The night before the gala, Patrick found me rehearsing imaginary conversations in front of our bedroom mirror, trying to prepare for every possible interaction. "Ready to face your past?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, his expression fond. I met his eyes in the mirror, suddenly certain of my purpose. "Ready to showcase my present," I corrected. This wasn't about proving my worth to people who had underestimated me; it was about honoring the journey that had led me to a life more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined when I fled Toronto. The Museum of Anthropology transformed beautifully for our gala, with sustainable lighting casting a warm glow across the grand hall. Ancient artifacts in glass cases stood witness to our modern celebration, a reminder of the impermanence of human triumph and tragedy alike. Patrick and I arrived early to review final arrangements: the organic floral centerpieces, the locally sourced menu, the string quartet playing softly in the corner. Everything perfect, everything a reflection of the values that had built our success. "Nervous?" Patrick asked, adjusting his bow tie as we watched staff add finishing touches. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the years of success evident not in material things but in the confident set of his shoulders, the calm assurance with which he carried himself. Oddly, no, I realized with surprise, smoothing the silk of my emerald gown. The anxiety that had plagued me for weeks had dissolved, replaced by a calm certainty. This is our world, they're just visiting it. As guests began arriving, Patrick and I stationed ourselves near the entrance, greeting investors and colleagues with practiced ease. My hair, once long like Elizabeth's, now fell in a sophisticated bob that framed my face. The diamond pendant Patrick had given me on our 5th anniversary rested at my throat, catching the light with every breath. I felt powerful, authentic, completely myself. I spotted them immediately: my mother entering first in a navy dress that screamed old money Toronto, her posture rigid with the same unyielding standards I'd grown up beneath. Elizabeth followed, still beautiful but with new lines of stress around her eyes, wearing a dress that looked expensive but slightly dated. Mark trailed behind them, his receding hairline and thickened waistline making him almost unrecognizable from the man who had broken my heart. They paused just inside the doorway, taking in the elegant surroundings and clearly searching for familiar faces in a sea of strangers. For a moment, I considered approaching them immediately, but something held me back. Let them find me, I decided. Let them see me in my element first. Maya's voice broke through my thoughts as she ran toward us, beautiful in her junior bridesmaid dress from our receptionist's wedding. Our 8-year-old daughter had insisted on coming to Mommy and Daddy's important party for the first hour before the babysitter would take her home. Mom. Dad. Jennifer says I can have one more of those little tarts before I have to leave, she announced, her dark eyes so like Patrick's sparkling with excitement. Just one, I smiled, kneeling to straighten the sash on her dress. And remember, indoor voice for fancy parties. I know, she rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience of childhood. I'm not a baby. I caught my mother watching this interaction from across the room, her expression shifting from polite interest to shock as she realized who the child was. The family resemblance was undeniable. Maya had Patrick's eyes but my smile, a perfect blend of us both. Their circuit around the room eventually brought them to where Patrick, Maya, and I stood chatting with the mayor about green energy initiatives. My mother noticed me first, her practiced social smile freezing momentarily before recovering. Audrey, she recovered first, embracing me with theatrical affection. You look absolutely stunning. Mother, I responded evenly, accepting her air kiss. I'm glad you could make it. I turned to include Patrick and Maya. This is my husband, Patrick Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Global Investments. And this is our daughter, Maya. Patrick Reynolds, Elizabeth clarified, extending her hand, always researching, always calculating advantages. Some things never changed. Your reputation precedes you. I've followed your company's expansion with interest. All due respect, Mrs. Davis, but our success has been a partnership from day one, Patrick replied smoothly, his hand finding the small of my back. Audrey's operational genius made my vision possible. The surprise in their eyes was subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't the narrative they had expected, the heartbroken girl finding a successful man to rescue her. This was a partnership of equals. And who is this beautiful young lady? My mother asked, bending slightly toward Maya. I'm Maya Reynolds, our daughter announced with the confidence of a child who has never been made to feel lesser. I'm 8 years old and I'm going to be an artist and a businesswoman when I grow up, like my mom. The simple statement, delivered with childish certainty, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Maya had never questioned that art and business could coexist, had never been told that her dreams were impractical or insufficient. The contrast between her upbringing and my own had never been so stark. Maya is quite the artist, Patrick added proudly. She gets that from Audrey. Mark Davis introduced himself stiffly. Compliance officer at Meridian. Yes, we're familiar with your position, Patrick nodded professionally. Welcome to the family of companies, Mark. The acquisition was finalized last month, I confirmed, savoring the moment without malice. Patrick will be making the official announcement during his speech. Their discomfort was palpable as they processed this new reality, the man who had discarded me for someone stronger now answering to the company I had helped build, the sister who had taken what was mine now standing before me not as the superior sibling but as the wife of a mid-level employee. Maya, darling, Jennifer is waiting to take you home, I said, noticing our daughter stifling a yawn. Say good night to everyone. After Patrick walked them to the waiting babysitter, my mother found a moment to pull me aside, her fingers wrapping around my elbow in a gesture that once would have signaled an impending criticism. I always knew you would do well for yourself, she stated, as though rewriting history. You had such potential. Did you? I asked mildly, refusing to play along with this revisionist narrative. I recall different assessments. She waved dismissively, diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. A mother pushes her children to achieve their best. Elizabeth needed confidence, you needed motivation. What I needed was support, I corrected gently, free of the anger that once would have accompanied these words. What I found was strength on my own terms. She studied me with new eyes, calculating as always. Well, she sipped her champagne, I suppose I should thank this Patrick for seeing what I missed. Patrick saw me clearly, I agreed, but he didn't create my success, Mother. We built it together because we value each other as equals. That's the difference. Her practiced smile faltered momentarily, genuine emotion breaking through the carefully maintained facade. Was it regret? Realization? It disappeared too quickly for me to be certain. Elizabeth and Mark are having difficulties, she confided, changing tactics. Perhaps you could put in a good word? Family should help family. There it was, the real purpose behind her pleasant facade. Not reconciliation but advantage. Some things truly never changed. Their performance will determine their future with the company, I replied evenly, just as mine did. If you'll excuse me, I should greet the other guests. As I moved through the room, accepting congratulations on the acquisition and discussing sustainability initiatives with investors, I felt strangely lightweight. The confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated for weeks had come and gone, leaving me not drained but energized. I spotted Elizabeth approaching determinedly, Mark trailing behind her. They cornered me near a display of Northwest Coast masks, the carved wooden faces seeming to watch our interaction with ancient wisdom. Your husband is impressive, my sister acknowledged reluctantly. The way he commands the room. You've done well for yourself. The backhanded compliment hung in the air, the implication that my success was merely a reflection of my husband's, not a partnership we built together. We've done well together, I corrected. That's how true partnerships work, something worth considering in your own arrangements. Elizabeth's expression hardened at the gentle rebuke. Mark looked away uncomfortably, unable to meet my eyes. The dynamic between them seemed strained, brittle in a way that triggered not satisfaction but an unexpected pang of compassion. They had what they thought they wanted, only to discover it wasn't the prize they'd imagined. Do you ever think about Toronto? Mark asked suddenly, his first direct question to me. About what might have been. I studied him, this man who had once been the center of my world, now a stranger in a slightly rumpled suit. Did I ever wonder about the road not taken? About who I might have become if I had stayed? No, I answered honestly. I don't live in might-have-beens. The evening continued with Patrick's speech announcing the Meridian acquisition, champagne toasts, and conversations about future directions. Throughout it all, I felt my family's eyes following me, watching as executives sought my opinion, as Patrick referenced my contributions, as I navigated the room with the confidence of someone exactly where she belonged. The official portion of the evening concluded, leaving guests to mingle over dessert and brandy. Patrick was deep in conversation with potential investors near the main exhibit, his animated gestures indicating genuine enthusiasm for the project they were discussing. I stood alone for a moment, Observing the GA.